I'm David Haynes. I'm the editorial page editor of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. And we're joined today on this special edition of Fourth and State by two leaders of the Republican Party in the State Assembly. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Appreciate it.
I'd like to start with a question on the economy. According to the latest federal statistics, Wisconsin is among the worst job creators in the country, and wages are actually falling here. Given that, what does this budget, the state budget that just came out of joint finance, do to help create jobs?
Well, we know that over the course of the past 2 years, Wisconsin has had a tumultuous time. We know that the election was decided on jobs in 2010, and when the legislature convened in 2011, we began to focus as much as possible on trying to put the state in a better direction after really what I would say is 6 to 8 years of bad economic times. When we went forward, if you remember, we passed a number of jobs in that first month special session. Lots of things that were focused on job creation and trying to turn Wisconsin around. We then had Act 10, which I still think was one of the single best pieces of legislation that we passed last session because it allowed us to have the surplus and to reinvest in our economy that you saw in the budget we're in today. But we did go through an awfully tough time. When you read some of the national statistics, we see that employers are concerned most about the future of our country and how their costs are going to be put out of whack. We see that for a while, I really think Wisconsin was behind the eight ball because of the recall and the way it was launched and the effort that so many people had to really downplay all the good things that were happening in Wisconsin. I think we've now begun to turn a corner. I think that as we see some of those numbers that are coming out, it's really an estimate. So every time we come back and have the corrections, it seems that more often than not, those numbers are improving based on the first estimates. And we see that the national mood is heading in the right direction for Wisconsin too. CEO Magazine and a lot of those people who are looking to bring jobs across the country look at Wisconsin as a better place than it was before. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I am satisfied with all of the results because I'd like Wisconsin to be even further ahead. But considering the past 2 years, I feel like we're in a really good place, which is why this budget is allowing us to invest in so many of our priorities, cutting taxes, increasing funding for schools, and more educational options for kids.
So what specifically in the budget would you point to as a job-creating sort of policy?
I would say putting more money, nearly doubling the governor's tax cut from $348 to about $670, putting more money into Wisconsin residents' pockets to help drive the economy, specifically not only with middle class, but also with targeted towards job creators as well. I think that's probably one of the single most impactful things that we did in the budget.
And I should point out Representative John Nygren and Assembly Speaker Robin Voss. I failed to introduce you when I opened. Erin Richards.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for coming here today. So there's been a lot of discussion about the last minute add to the budget that included a provision for private school tuition tax credits. A lot of people didn't see that as something that was getting a lot of discussion at the front end, got added at the tail end. How does that affect the state? How much is that going to cost? And how do you deal with some criticism that says this is supporting parents who already have the means to send their children to private schools?
Well, I think the focus from an education standpoint, I mean, we've already identified the fact that we had a significant growth in our revenues because of tough decisions we made in the past, and to put us in a place to fund our priorities. Namely, the governor's budget didn't have per pupil increases for education. We were able to take some of those revenues and put them towards a per pupil increase. But in addition to that, we also wanted to fund additional options for parents, whether that be school choice or and that's targeted at people at 185% of poverty or below. But we also believe that school choice should be available to all Wisconsin residents, and that's where that tax deduction comes in. It's a deduction, not a credit. The estimated costs are between $25 and $30 million. It's capped at $4,000 for elementary and $10,000 for high school, and it is about giving parents more choices on education that's appropriate for their kids.
Yeah, our budget's all, I guess in my mind, our budget really focuses on our two main priorities as Republicans. I think when everybody ran in 2010 and again for re-election in 2012, we thought Wisconsin's tax burden was too high, and we thought that our schools needed to make sure that they are doing everything possible to be the best in the country, be they public or private. We definitely put a focus on our public schools in the last election by giving school districts additional tools to be innovative, to be able to have reform as we go forward. Some districts are already doing things like having merit pay for teachers and trying to give incentives based on how well they do. I think Governor Walker had an innovative idea in trying to tie performance of school districts with funding. I think that's something we'll look at in the future. But as we look at this budget, I think we were able to find a common sense middle ground so that every single child in the state, be they in public or private, will have more resources going to them in one way or another. It could be the tuition tax deduction, which for a family, a mom and a dad both working in public service, they would get a tax deduction of somewhere between $200 and $400. So it's not like we're giving away some huge amount of money when they're paying anywhere from $4,000 to $12,000 for tuition. I think it's quite modest, actually. When we looked at where the governor was with school choice to expand it to 9 districts with literally potentially thousands of kids without a cap in the second year of the biennium, I think we found that common sense middle ground again to start, to show that the program can work statewide. It'll be a relatively small increase in the amount of funding that we're giving for choice. The biggest increase in choice funding actually comes in helping to fix what some people have called the flaw in the Milwaukee funding scheme, so that you are now going to see over the course of the next 12 years property tax relief right here in the city of Milwaukee, in the Milwaukee School District. So I think when you try to put all that on the table, property tax relief in Milwaukee, more choices for kids across the state, a small tax deduction for people who've already chosen private schools, and the biggest chunk of money in a per pupil increase for every single child in the state, I think we found a pretty good middle ground.
I think it's about, rather than creating winners and losers, trying to find a way that everybody, every family, whether you, whatever school district you're in, you can find an opportunity for some choice with education that you can feel good about in this budget. I think we did that.
So we have a few questions from our followers on Twitter. This one is from WI Wisconsin for Palin, and this reader wants to know, is it true that the budget grows Wisconsin government by 3 to 6%? If that's true, why?
Well, it's less than 6%. I think it's in the neighborhood of 3%, and the fact is that with Medicaid alone is eating up nearly 2% of that increase. I think it's 1.8% of that increase, and that's through federal mandates, et cetera. So when you look at where we started once again with the governor's budget, the additional revenues that we brought in gave us the ability to fund education, but also give more back to the taxpayers. That actually is considered spending in our budget as well. So. Whether people like it or not, actually, the percentage of increase actually includes tax cuts, and we think that that's reasonable to give that money back to the taxpayer.
And once again, as you look at it, there is a natural inflationary increase and there's a natural population increase. We have been told that's about 1.5% to 2%, depending on how you rate inflation and the population changes. So if we're able to hold our budget to just increasing at the level of inflation and any adjustments in population, in essence, in my mind, that's about a 0% increase. We're pretty darn close to that if you look at the course of the 2-year biennium. I'm really proud that this budget not only holds the line on spending, but it actually has fewer state employees at the end of the 2 years than we have today. There's a reduction of about 17 people, which out of 60,000-ish employees is not a huge number, but considering the fact that for the past decade we've been heading in the other direction for the most part, I think it's a good step.
There were some issues that were important to our caucus from the beginning. Robin mentioned the number of employees. The governor increased it by about 710. We reduced that down to actually a negative number. First time, I think, in a long time that we actually saw a reduction. But also borrowing was another thing. Bonding was another focus for our folks in the caucus, and we reduced the bonding by about $380 million. So while we focus on the inflationary level of spending, including tax cuts going back, you also have to bring those two other pieces that I think conservative-minded people throughout the state have been focusing on, and we check those both off as well.
Ernie Franzen, Associate Editorial Page Editor. We were critical Sunday of items in the budget that we regard as not being budgetary matters, fiscal matters. Bail bondsman comes to mind. Kicking the Center for Investigative Journalism off the UW campus is another one. Do you expect those items to stay in, and why are they why are they budget items? Why would you put them in as a budget?
Sure. Well, yes, I expect them to stay in. It is my hope that the budget that came out of joint finance would pass through both chambers without anything more than technical changes. That's the way we've done it in the past. I think it's been pretty effective for conservatives and taxpayers across Wisconsin. Let me just talk for a second about that bail bonds provision. It's something that I have long believed in. And when you look at where we were last time, I listened to what Governor Walker said in his veto message, where he really felt like we didn't have an opportunity to test whether or not it was supported by the state. Was it in the best interest of taxpayers? How do we know that it's going to be effective for the state? So the provision that was put in the budget does what I think is something that helps taxpayers, and that's why it belongs inside the budget. There was a study done by WPRI that showed that Wisconsin has a higher no-show rate than other states. We're one of only, I think, 2 or 4 states that doesn't have bail bonds right now. 4. So the whole point of bond at or when you're at trial is to guarantee you show up for court. Anything that increases the ability for people to show up at court is a good thing, because you have a smaller number of no-shows means more effective and efficient courts, and hopefully a smaller cost for taxpayers. So the proposal that we put in is totally optional. In the 5 counties that are in there, if there's a judge who doesn't want to use it, they don't have to. So every one of the judges, if it's as unpopular as they believe it is, never has to utilize it, and not a single surety bond will ever be issued. It also requires a director of state courts to develop a report on very specific criteria at the end of 5 years to say, was it a good idea or was it not? I think hopefully at the end of the 5 years, some judges will try it. They will see that it actually does save money and increase efficiency, and over time will not only mean that people of lower means who don't have the money to put up a bond will be able to not sit in jail but still show up for court. And at the same time, we'll have a system that's much more efficient than it is today, making sure people show up for court, but not doing it in a way that hurts the efficiency of the entire process.
Hey, have you talked to the governor about this?
Not about this specific provision, no.
Okay.
I've talked to his chief of staff,
And
but I haven't talked to the
what
governor.
did they indicate that they're planning to, they would veto this again or not?
We did not get into vetoes. I think the governor's been pretty clear in all of the discussions that he has had. He waits until the budget goes through the entire legislature, and then he makes his decision, because who knows if that provision is going to stay until the end. I sure hope it will, but we don't know until votes
If
happen
it's
in both
such a good
houses.
idea, though, why did many in the criminal justice system, judges and some law enforcement, say, let's not do this?
Well, what I've learned about a lot of things in government is that change is really hard. When you are wedded to the status quo, people don't want to try anything new, which is why we listened to what the judges said and made it a totally voluntary program. If they don't like it, they don't have to use it.
Aaron?
Actually, he
No,
asked
what
the
about
Center for-
the Center for Investigative Journalism and some of the other items? I mean, Kringle? But let's go to the center first.
Yeah. Well, Kringle was actually from the Democrats.
Democrats.
So,
I don't
I think
care.
hopefully there's a bipartisan love of Kringle. So that's good.
That's your area.
Yeah.
Well, as far as the Center for Investigative Journalism, I think the concern from our caucus was just about treating different entities on a fair, even playing field. There's other organizations very similar to them that are out there, and we don't. There was no request for proposal sent out to get somebody else to step up and do a bid, and because of that, UW chose who they chose. But from our standpoint, let's have a fair and open process that decisions are made based on merit, not just the UW making a choice.
But the argument is that you're paying them back for unfriendly articles, or in fact, and you specifically are doing.
I know that argument's out there. I
How do you
will tell
respond to
you.
that?
I will tell you, it wasn't my motion, but as the chair of the committee, it's on me. So that's fine if people want to draw those connections.
In fact, we don't know who made that, whose idea this is. I mean, everybody keeps on saying, you've said this is a process where it all comes together.
Right.
And Democrats, I can remember when I covered the legislature years ago, that was the same thing that they did. No one is held responsible for the actions that occur. Why is that? Why don't we put names on there and let people stand up and say, I'm the one who proposed this?
Well, I mean, that's part of we can look at reforms for the process. We can have those discussions, but remember, you're dealing with two different bodies. You're dealing with members of both the Assembly and the Senate.
Well, you could put 2 names on it. You could put 5 names on it, but right now there are no names on it. And both of you have talked about, have actually spoken out defending that process. But I think, don't you lack accountability if people don't know who's putting what in the budget?
We all voted for it. Just remember that. So, I mean, I think that's the highest level of accountability is when you actually stand up and take a vote for it.
John's right. I mean, Where an idea comes from is nowhere near as important in my mind as to who supports it and why they support it. As the speaker, I ultimately am responsible for everything that goes through the legislature, and I have said I will stand up and take responsibility for that because I believe in the public policy.
What, I mean, because it's more important for you to know who's supporting it doesn't mean it's irrelevant who introduced it or who's pushing it. Am I not understanding that correctly? I mean, it is somewhat important. Like your name has come up, and you've said on air and just now that you weren't the one behind it. But the center's written about a number of people, and it would be interesting to know if this is a legitimate ideological position that someone's putting out there, or if this is, you know, an axe to grind that we might be dealing with. Agree? Disagree?
Well, first of all, you never can assume that you understand someone's motivations, regardless of if you know who originally said that I want this or not. And there were multiple people who talked about this concept. So it's not about one person, and it's not about any sort of gotcha. I mean, I know that they've been trying to make it seem that because they're an investigative journalism center and they call themselves that somehow people are going after investigative journalists. Well, first of all, I think that the process that the university went through is consistent with some of the questions that we have about the decision-making process that they utilize. Imagine if in Madison, because remember we're in the heart of liberalism, not just in Wisconsin, but one of the bastions around the country, if they had put together an office and given space over to an organization that had received funding from the Koch brothers. Now, even if they got funding from the Journal-Sentinel, from the Pulitzer Foundation, from all kinds of others who were legitimate, I think that you could make a case that the journalism department at UW-Madison would never consider that because the world that they live in would bring heaps of criticism upon them. So instead, someone came up, funded by the same methodology with a beginning grant from George Soros and a number of others, and stepped forward and said, we're going to create this journalism center where we are going to utilize the tools that are given to us with the imprimatur of UW-Madison to give us legitimacy.
Are they doing legitimate work or not?
Well, I don't know. I don't read all the stuff that they put out.
Well, I mean, have you read any of it?
I've read some of it, sure. I think some of it, once again, is based on student internships as they go forward. So it's based on what each intern does. Some of the stuff I agree with, some I don't agree with. But I don't agree with the idea of saying that just because newspapers around the state, especially some of those that are smaller, are having a problem making themselves profitable, that we are going to turn news gathering and news writing over to outside third parties funded by people with a political agenda, utilizing UW-Madison as a legitimacy, and then publish that and somehow make it legitimate, regardless of whether they're conservative or liberal. Just like I wouldn't think the university should be supporting conservative ideas with taxpayer money either. Now, I bet that they would never do that ever anyways, but I don't think that that would be any more legitimate than what they're doing on the other side.
Aaron?
Hi, I cover education, and so I have quite a few people on Twitter that have sent in some questions. This one's from Garden Gal, who lives in Enderis Park, which is full of city employees. Why did you forego common sense conservative principles of local control to remove the residency requirement? And she says that we will not accept personal freedom as an answer.
Well, personal choice, I don't know, I guess we'd consider it individual freedom, but yeah, I think that that's what it comes down to, people being able to make a decision where they live and what's best for them. And it's funny, you cover education. We went to the public hearings, and one of the topics that we heard about over and over again from people testifying was about kids and the choices and opportunities they had from an educational standpoint and being limited. One particular one comes to mind, I think it was a wife of a firefighter with a child with autism, and just didn't have the educational choices that they felt were important for their child. So I think we did have a sympathy for parents in that situation, and that's one of the reasons why we did repeal the law as it sat.
Well, James Causey, columnist. Yeah, I'm just curious as to why you're pushing push for this so hard when you have a mayor, alderman, county supervisors who are so much against it. I mean, this isn't a job creator, and I thought the budget was supposed to be about job creation.
Well, it is about job creation, but it's also about making every part of Wisconsin the best that we possibly can. I look at the city of Milwaukee, and as I've said to the mayor, I met with a mayor myself. I've met with members of the city council. I've talked to them about this topic. I own property in the city of Milwaukee. I don't know the last Republican speaker that has actually owned property in the city of Milwaukee. So I want Milwaukee to succeed just like everybody around this table does. But I don't think you do it by making an assumption that the only way we can convince people to live inside the city of Milwaukee is by requiring it underneath a union contract that you're not willing to even negotiate on. The mayor said to those members of the negotiating team, we're never going to talk about lifting residency, so go to Madison and fix it. Now, unfortunately for the mayor, they did. And I believe the argument. I've never agreed with the idea of having a residency requirement. If it's work-related, which is ultimately one of the things we talked about, where it's based on the job that you have so that you have to respond within so much time, that's reasonable. But saying that literally living on one side of the block is illegal or against your contract, but the other side of the block is not, makes no common sense in the world that we live in today.
So you don't believe the mayor's argument that people will leave the city within 10 years? He has a number of thousands of people fleeing the city.
People will make choices what's right for them. Whether that, I don't think the people are just going to automatically leave their home that they have in Milwaukee. But the mayor's argument, one of the mayor's arguments has been from a financial side. I will say I had a proposal that was out there, and we had discussions with the leadership from the city of Milwaukee. They chose to walk away from a potential deal that would have had a financial give back from the union. So
What was that?
That was a pension, wasn't it?
Well, it was the 3% and 6%. I mean, I actually talked to the mayor on the day of the vote about having something in the budget, like John's talking about, which would say that if you are a current employee and you wanted to move outside the city, you would have a give back of 3%. If you were a brand new employee, in essence, it would be a reduction in the base salary, and you could kind of bonus because you can't reduce people's pay, but it would be a bonus. And the same for new employees, that you could have a lower base amount and maybe give a 6% bonus for living inside the city. So instead of saying you must, give people a financial incentive that helps to build up the base for what you want by using, the carrot instead of the stick. The mayor said no, they didn't want that. They were going to fight it out in the legislature and ultimately ended up losing.
I talked to the mayor's chief of staff Friday about this deal. Their position is you never officially offered it to them, and that you didn't have the votes to get it through joint finance. It would have been an 8-8 vote.
No, that's a lie. She sat in the room with me, with the majority leader, the governor's chief of staff, and she sat there and we offered her the deal. She kept wanting more and more, and we said, look, this is the option we're giving you. She said, if that's all you're giving us, I can't say yes, and she left.
Is it true is it true that they've come back and asked for the deal to be put back on the table?
They haven't come to me.
They haven't talked to me.
I think I would go back, if I remember correctly, the vote was 12-4. That was with no financial give back. So I would suggest if the city came out and said, yes, we'll take the deal, it quite possibly could have been a unanimous vote, or at least you could have got a few Democrats as well. So
Jennifer Gonda.
Yeah.
You said this was a job creator. How is it a job creator? I don't understand how residency will increase jobs.
Sure. Well, let's take a look at the city of Milwaukee and their need to find well-qualified teachers.
Aside from teachers.
Well, that's kind of like the other question before.
No, seriously. I understand the teacher, that's been brought up before, but aside from teachers, how does this create jobs?
Well, let's think about what residency was when it was put in the 1930s. For the most part, the man worked and the woman was at home. Many of the people didn't have a car and they either walked to work or they took a trolley or they took the bus in later years. We now have a world where it is not uncommon to have two people working and wanting to live somewhere in the middle. Let's assume that you have a working couple. The woman or the man lives in the city and they're a police officer. The woman or the man works in Madison and they want to choose to live in Johnson Creek, or they want to choose to live in even Waukesha so they can get past the heavy traffic in the morning commute. Under the current law, the way that it was, that option was almost never given, and very rarely were any sort of specificities as far as letting people go out allowed. So I think that as we look to the future, I want to attract the best and the brightest people to work in public service no matter where they are.
But the Milwaukee Police Department and Fire Department are not having a hard time filling jobs.
Well, but the difference is that the other spouse, we have no idea how many people never apply because they know that the requirement is that you have to live inside the city. So I think I would much rather have many more people applying so we get the best and brightest, not just those who are willing to accept the status quo. And I think in the end, we are going to see that, yes, there is a huge amount of people that want to apply for those jobs, especially now that they've given the freedom to be able to have their family live where they think it's best, not artificially inside the borders of a city or a village or a town.
There's been this theme that's gone on this year that the legislature's anti-Milwaukee. Tell me, do you think that the budget bill, as it stands now, is good or bad for the city?
Well, let's look at Milwaukee. I mean, let's just look at the things that are specific to the requests that they've had. Our budget increases funding for transit. That is not something that Republicans normally do. It's in the second year of the biennium. It's 4% increase. Chris Abele is ecstatic.
We got a thank you from the Marina Dimitrievich.
Yeah, right, exactly. In the city of Milwaukee, as another example, yeah, that's good luck finding a way for them to agree on stuff. So at least that's a positive. But if you look at what's happening with other funding inside the budget, child support. The biggest utilizer of child support statewide is Milwaukee County, and the Joint Finance Committee replenished all of the money that was reduced in the last budget to go for child support to establish paternity. Biggest number going to them. That funding flaw, it's not exactly a popular position among Republicans to be able to fix the funding flaw in Milwaukee when it's going to be very expensive, but I think it's the right thing to do. It would have been easy for us under both Democrats. Democrats didn't fix the funding flaw for Milwaukee. So would you say that they were anti-Milwaukee because they didn't care about fixing the funding flaw? I don't think that's a fair characterization, just like somehow, because we didn't agree with the mayor on a single issue of residency, that we're anti-Milwaukee. That's
I would
not
also
fair.
say we prioritize, from an infrastructure standpoint, things are important to Milwaukee too, with the Hone Bridge and the Zoo interchange and the 94 corridor.
So bottom line, will Milwaukee be better off or worse off when this gets through?
Oh, there's no doubt they'll be better off. Families will have more money. School choice, there's actually an increase in the scholarship for kids who are in school choice. That means those schools will have more money to spend. That's directly in the economy in Milwaukee. As John said, infrastructure programs are going forward. We increased the funding for the 80-20 split in the transportation program, which is an awful lot of the road work that's being done all throughout the city. We fixed the funding flaw. We actually put more money into drug courts. Now that's statewide, but we increased that by 150% for alternatives to incarceration. I mean, I think we could go on and on.
So you've got a pro-Milwaukee bias?
He didn't say that.
Milwaukee's our largest city. We want Milwaukee to succeed. If we can,
want everyone to succeed.
Get Milwaukee headed in the right direction, the rest of the state's going to follow.
But I think part of it is there's nobody from Milwaukee in the leadership or on your committee outside of Alberta.
Right.
Yeah. So there aren't people. There are people outside.
Dale Koinga, represents part of Milwaukee.
Yeah, don't forget that in the legislature right now, in the assembly at least, I believe there are 21 Republicans who represent, or 21 legislators who represent portions of Milwaukee County, and of those 10 are Republican. So there's a pretty good group of Republicans just who want to see southeastern Wisconsin succeed. Now, as John said, Milwaukee's the biggest city in our state. It's one of the largest economic drivers. We want them to succeed. And ultimately, as someone who represents an awful lot of people who love Milwaukee but don't want to end up paying for it forever, we want Milwaukee to become more self-sufficient so it doesn't need as much help from the state and from the rest of the taxpayers.
Speaking of Koinga, Dale Koinga, his
Koinga.
tax plan,
Koinga,
Koinga,
like Koinga.
Yep.
I
apologize.
No,
Me too.
It took me a while to get used to that.
It does it.
Yeah.
But he's proposed a tax plan that would cut taxes again and provide tax reform for Wisconsin. There's the argument that we can't afford that tax plan. What's your take on that?
Well, I certainly don't agree with that. If you look at the amount of tax increases that were proposed and enacted just in the legislature when the Democrats controlled all three branches, the House, the Senate, or the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor's office, we still have not reduced taxes by as much as they increased them. So I certainly think that Wisconsin is overtaxed, and we are going to do something every single session to reduce the tax burden for Wisconsin citizens. I believe that the more we allow families to keep, the better our economy is going to be. Dale did it in a way that I think is fair because it addresses a reduction for every single tax bracket. The package that was put together at the end with the combination of what the governor proposed and what Dale was able to spearhead has the biggest impact on the middle class. They have the largest percentage reduction, the largest dollar value is going to the middle class. So I think at the end of the day, is there more that we could do? Yes. But this was a huge step forward to make our tax code simpler and fairer.
But can you afford to then do roads? Provide sufficient funds for transportation. For
I think we're gonna have similar concerns with funding roads probably in the next budget. Because of the issues that we've all identified. More fuel efficient cars, #1 driver of of our transportation fund is a per gallon tax. So
And that's not sustainable in the
Right,
long run.
the fewer gallons that are put in your car, the fewer dollars in our fund. But when you look at where we're on pace from a revenue standpoint, just as long as we follow a similar course, we will have no structural deficit. We'll actually see an increase in our balance at the end of the budget. So I would think most people would agree that that our better days are ahead of us. So we believe that this budget will give more money back to the taxpayers and in a fair and balanced way, prioritizing things like education in an equal and fair way. And at the end of the day, we'll have higher revenues and a larger surplus.
One of our followers, Murphy MS73, would like to know, Speaker Voss, who pressured Koyenga to water down his tax plan?
Well, it's Koyenga. Yes. Koyenga, you'll get used to it.
Probably not.
Well, nobody pressured Dale to water down his plan. That is some kind of a misnomer that's out there that is just false. Let me just say that is false, as clear as I can. Do we have to find a way to balance it within the structures of our government, just like Ernie said? Yes. Would we have been able to cut taxes by $1 billion if we hadn't worked hard over the course of the last few years? No. Because don't forget, there are 3 parts to this tax package, and people are only talking about 1/3 of it. Governor Walker proposed a reduction of about $340 million. Dale Koyenga's plan, along with the tuition tax credit and everything put together, about doubles that. I think it's about $330 million more. And the tax cuts that were phased in over time for the manufacturing tax credit for creating jobs here in Wisconsin is about another $300 million. So when you add all of that together, the total tax reduction is about $1 billion. So for anybody who thinks that $1 billion is not bold enough in Wisconsin, I guess I just fundamentally disagree, because we were able to do it while still investing in schools and still investing in all of our priorities, but also a pretty sizable tax reduction.
You did say on air that you asked Dale to come back with options.
Yeah.
Right.
And what were the options? One was
150 and 300 in addition to the original.
and then 400.
Well, his ideal plan, right.
Right.
Okay. And
Right.
so, I mean, that's what he's talking about, the difference between the ideal plan and what you
Well, yeah, but there was no pressure. I mean, asking people to come up with options is how the legislature works. I mean, for me to say there's only one answer and we're going to not deviate from that, even if other factors come forward, would not be the right way to govern. We have to be able to try to put the best package together, which is why ultimately we were able to get to a number which was where our goal was from the very beginning, which was to double the governor's tax cut. But you still have to get the product to the Senate.
Right, and you also, I mean, our priorities. I mean, we could have done Dale's plan, but at the same time, we wouldn't have been able to provide any type of per pupil increase for schools. So, I mean, it was a priority of our caucus to be able to do both. I mean, if you want it all, right? I mean, in this case, we were able to get sizable tax cut on top of the governor's, and at the same time fund schools, which is important for our members.
Right.
A question on the streetcar. Given the support in the city, particularly in the city government for the project, the provision in the budget regarding the streetcar looks to be simply like a way to kill it. So given the existing laws and PSC oversight, why do that?
I would just say, when I looked at it, I come from the northern area, and to see the ratepayers up in my area pay the infrastructure costs for a project in Milwaukee just doesn't seem fair. And I don't care where that project is, if it's Madison and ratepayers up north got to pay it, or vice versa, it doesn't seem right. So,
But ratepayers pay for street road projects, freeway projects. They pay for moving intersections in Racine and that sort of Racine County. How is this different?
I mean, I think that's what I was just saying. I think that same argument can be made no matter where it is. So,
Okay.
yeah, it should allow the local municipality, local community to step up and say this is our priority, and also step up with funding as well, not require this to be spread out amongst ratepayers throughout the state. And I would make that argument no matter what community it is.
So Milwaukee payers or Wauwatosa payers in West Allis should pay for the zoo interchange work?
Well, we're talking about the ratepayers. There's a difference. I mean, to say that people from northeast Wisconsin or northern Wisconsin are going to utilize the trolley, I think is pretty much a little bit of a stretch. But I would suggest that they're probably going to utilize the Hone Bridge. They're probably going to utilize the zoo interchange. Transportation of materials and goods are going to run through those areas. So I think everybody should bear those costs.
And let's remember what the mayor implied in all of his comments. This was not a transportation project. It was supposed to be an attraction and something to create buzz kind of around Milwaukee. So the idea of saying to ratepayers who live in my district or anywhere in the We Energy service territory that we are going to pay higher rates by, it's a pretty big project. I mean, who knows what the final
If
estimates
you
were? but
guys are
tens of
so
millions.
concerned about ratepayers, why are you giving the cable industry a pass?
We're not giving the cable industry a pass.
No? What about the 45-day?
That just matches what already happens with DirecTV and what happens with the telephone. I mean,
It's consistent.
It was an anachronism in the law when cable had a monopoly, when we required them to have longer than a 30-day time period in order to let them give notice to their customers. I certainly think that if you haven't paid your bill after 30 days, that they should do everything they can to collect and have the right to turn it off if you haven't paid.
And aren't you opening the door? I mean, Ernie brings up the zoo project. I mean, if you have to move power lines for a project, which highway projects you have to move power lines, why shouldn't the ratepayers pay that?
Well, because in
And
a
I mean,
highway,
that's what you're basically doing. If you say Milwaukee's ratepayers have to pay for the streetcar, then do Milwaukee's and Tosa's or whatever's ratepayers have to pay when power lines get removed?
well, there's a difference because, as I just said, that in a road project, there's a public purpose, and that's
But
the
it's still the
finding.
ratepayers.
Right, but if there's a public purpose, that is a whole lot different than creating buzz for some sort of thing that has no relation to economic development or to transportation. So I think if you're doing something to create buzz, we don't expect if you want to create a new website for the city of Burlington, you're not going to ask ratepayers to pay for it to help generate the marketing for that city. If that's what's happening with the streetcar, where it's not based on transportation, it's not based on economic development, and it's certainly not based on trying to do something more than generate buzz, I don't think that ratepayers should have to pay for it. If
So
Milwaukee thinks
But
it's a
they've also
priority, fine.
argued that it is an economic development issue because it'll bring more business and people to downtown Milwaukee. And that's what they say. That's
I
what
know,
their argument is.
but I think if you put it to a referendum, if you had the discussion, if you had any sort of public involvement, people certainly do not think spending upwards of $100 million in a streetcar that goes in a loop is going to be the economic development that the city of Milwaukee, who tells us over and over they don't have the resources to put into economic development that I think they should be doing, that they're going to put it into this. But if they think it's a higher priority to pay for the streetcar than it is to hire more police or to do the economic job programs, development job programs that they've talked about for kids in the summer and those kind of things, that should be a local decision. But it shouldn't be one that they get to slough off to somebody else and then have us worry about figuring out how to pay for it.
Just so I'm clear, you said it doesn't have a public purpose? The streetcar doesn't have any public purpose?
No, I think it's very limited at best. I do not believe it has a public purpose like a road would, where literally thousands of people are going to use it on a daily
distinction's not
basis.
that it does have a public purpose and it doesn't have a public purpose. The distinction is it has a large public purpose and a small public purpose. Is that, and you've decided this has a small purpose, therefore.
Yeah, I mean, let's just think about the way that every local government operates. You can make a case that every project that a local government does has some public benefit, okay? So I'm not saying it has no public benefit, but when you're asking people outside that municipality to weigh the costs and you get to slough it off to somebody else, that's where I think it has to have a bigger public purpose than just, something that we hope will be positive economically over the long run.
What should the city do with that money instead, in your view?
Well, I think there's a lot of things.
It's transportation related though, right?
And it's
earmarked for
capital,
transportation.
yeah.
Right, I mean, there's a bunch of things that we could look at. First of all, they could do a partnership with the city to get people to actually work on getting to jobs. I have accepted the fact, as somebody who represents an area that on the east side has bus service, on the west side does not. Especially if you live in a city where people are of lower economic means, they need to have a transportation system that can help get them to jobs. I would much rather focus on trying to have a more viable bus system where, especially in the Northwest Corridor, where there are people who are hungry to be able to get to a job, that we focus on that as opposed to a trolley that goes around in a circle, hoping somebody jumps on and jumps off.
Would you have supported Walker's bus rapid transit plan when he was county exec?
Yeah, I think that was an innovative idea. I mean, once again, that's an idea that you could actually utilize something to see the direct economic benefit, something where at the same time you were getting people directly to jobs and it was mobile, so as the world changed, you could change those rapid bus routes. When you put down the tracks, or the wires for an electric trolley, you don't have the ability to move it around as jobs.
Isn't this just a case of you like roads and you don't like this project?
Well, I like roads. I like transportation. As I just said, I think
you don't like this project.
No, I think it's a waste of money. And I think that, once again, if the city of Milwaukee chooses to spend their property tax dollars on a project that I think is dubious at best, they have every right to do
So
that.
the thinking and the rationale is not public purpose. It's actually whether you like the project or you don't like the project.
No, it's both. First of all, they have every right to do it. I am not saying that we did not pass a bill or pass legislation that says they cannot do it under any circumstances.
Right.
What we said is, if you're going to do it, you have to demonstrate to your own constituents that there's a public purpose. You can't just say it to people and then actually slough off the cost to everybody else who never gets to vote for you.
Can we talk about the education bill for a minute?
Sure.
When that came out Friday night, I was surprised to see the online voter registration.
Oh, election meeting.
I mean, the election
Yeah.
bill. I'm sorry. I was surprised to see the online voter registration in that. Is that something you're both on board with?
Yeah, I agree with the concept. Online voter registration goes perfectly, in my mind, with the way that we want to deal with voter ID and everything in the long run. So right now, if you go to the GAB's website, you are able to download a form, fill it all in, and mail it into your clerk, it's my understanding. What this would do is actually reduce the cost, because you would go online, you would fill out that exact same form, it would be double checked against the DOT database, so it says Robin J. Voss and my address, and all that has to match up exactly on my driver's license, and I'd be on the voter list. Still required to hopefully come in on election day with a photo ID to prove who I was, that's still our intention, but I think it's a good way to use technology to enhance our voter ID efforts, not go in the opposite path.
And why was the recall stuff? Why was that removed?
Well, you're trying to, you've been working on this, I've been working on the budget, but
Yeah.
my understanding is we're trying to get a bipartisan bill, something we can work together with the Democrats on, and anything that was contentious was removed.
Well, and my intention is to take this in pieces, because we did not want to try to make it seem like we were doing something. We had been working on this since the very beginning of January to try to put together an election reform package, hoping to bring Democrats along. At the end, we were able to get Democrats to agree on a sizable number of pieces. So we'll come back in the fall and we're going to take up voter ID. We're going to take up all the other pieces after we've had the summer to make sure we have every possible opportunity for people to give input and create the best possible bill.
So what was the thing that you didn't want to give up at the end? What you said you negotiated this. What, the voter ID stuff? What was it that you wanted to keep in?
Well, there's a bunch of things that we are negotiating that we're going to bring up later. Now, remember, when this bill was introduced, the whole reason that Jeff Stone introduced the bill, and it's one that I support 100%, and we are going to make sure we vote on before the end of session, and that's having a viable voter ID proposal in place for the November 2014 elections. But in the middle of that process, we got a victory. We saw that the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals found that there is a constitutional basis for Wisconsin enacting a voter ID statute. The next lawsuit that's pending is whether or not the one that passed the legislature in 2011 and 12 is actually constitutional. But we now know we have the right to do it. So we want to take and make sure that we analyze the court case, we see what happens in both of those cases as they move forward, so that we create a statute that will continue to pass constitutional muster and can be the law of the land for 2014. The other thing that I wanted is I want Citizens United codified. That was another thing that was in the proposal that we are now, there's another lawsuit that's pending. Wisconsin Right to Life is a participant in a case about whether or not those statutes are legal or not. Some folks wanted to see what the court case said in that as well. So we know we have a 2-year legislative session.
You wanted it codified, just be specific, and what particular things did you want as a result of that?
Sure. I do not believe that we should have restrictions on the ability of individuals to be able to advocate for their beliefs in a free and democratic society. That's one area that we compromised on. I don't believe, as you know, I don't believe in the aggregate limit. I think that as long as you have a limit on how much you can give to any one elected official, if you choose to give more or less, that should be your constitutional right. We already saw with the concept of Citizens United that people have the right for express advocacy all across the country, and it's made our system in many ways, I think, better. Because I would rather have more information flowing so voters can make an informed choice as opposed to less.
So you think if that would pass, that there would be an increase in the amount of money that's going through the system?
I don't know if it'd be an increase, but I think that there would hopefully be more transparency.
More information, that's paid information.
Yeah, but also, I mean, as an example, I would rather have money go through political parties. I think that they are more transparent. Everything has to be disclosed. Everything has to, you have a county party chairman, you have a state party chairman, you understand what the organization stands for. So those are all things we want to develop as a way to try to increase the opportunity for folks to participate. But at the same time, letting people who want to use those 527s, the entities that are allowed under Citizens United to continue. I fully support their right to free speech. I don't want to take theirs away. I just want to enhance the ability of others to do the same thing.
But would you require then, or to be separate, that transparency, letting people know who is contributing to whom?
Right, so if the bill would pass as we have negotiated, people would be able to give a larger amount of dollars to a political party. They'd be able to give a larger amount of dollars to an individual candidate. It's only, right now, the limit's in 1974, I think, or 72.
I think.
Yeah, we're $500. If you just updated that for inflation, it's 5 times. Well, we didn't even do that, we only went to 2 times. Because we don't want to have an undue influence that people would perceive from having such a huge increase all at one time. But at the same time, I think we have to update things, considering the fact that when that was passed, I was, 6 years old or 3 years old. I think the times have changed, and so certainly a cost to run elections.
Is the Senate on board with this, the current deal?
I can't speak for the state Senate, but my hope was that by having the opportunity for Democrats and Republicans to reach a consensus on topics that we both agreed with, setting aside the fact that we're going to come back in the fall after more study over the summer and keep working on election reform, I think that makes perfect sense.
On voter ID, what would change, what needs to change in the redone bill compared to what you did before?
Well, we had gotten some concerns from different entities talking about the provisions that were put in the bill in regards to, I'm sorry.
Provisional balance,
And
right?
that was part of it, but if you think about the way that someone casts their ballot right now, they have the ability to go and get a free ID, which I totally agree with. They have the ability to go and vote on election day. But there are certain circumstances where perhaps the information to be able to get their voter ID was burnt in a fire, or they have a religious objection, or, once again, they are too poor. We wanted to give every opportunity for people to be able to cast their ballot, but do so in a way that upholds the integrity of voter ID, but doesn't go to such extremes that potentially it could cause problems. I support the bill that we voted on last time, and that's why.
Was it flawed? Was the original bill flawed? Was it unconstitutional?
No, I don't believe so, but I'm not a constitutional lawyer. There are some who are saying that if you look at the Indiana statutes, which was modeled after, we should take a second look and just guarantee that as the case goes to the Supreme Court, that we have every chance to win, because it's too important to every single person in Wisconsin to make sure we have voter ID on the books for November 2014. And that's why we're kind of pausing, taking the summer to make sure that we have all the legal experts kind of lined up behind one common set of rational thinking. And then we'll come back in the fall and have every opportunity for that to move
So
forward.
these are 2 bills that we're talking about, this first bill and then a voter ID separately?
That's my plan. Now, that bill's not introduced. We're going to take time over the summer to try to work on that, and then we'll come back in September with our second effort.
And I wanted to ask you about abortion. When is that bill, when will the Assembly act on the bill that's being talked about?
Sonia's law?
Sonia's law. Yep. It's my understanding, and I don't control the state Senate, so I just take what you guys report and assume that it's right, that they intend to take it up this week. Right. But they intend to take it up this week.
That should be an ad.
When do you plan?
Well, that's why they're going to take it up first. So assuming that they are able to finish the bill this week, which I believe they'll take it up, I think that tomorrow is what I understand. My intention is to bring that up later in the week.
That seems to be moving really fast. Why the urgency on that abortion bill?
Well, that topic's been out there for quite some time. The bill was introduced by Representatives Lozick and Strakota after talking to a whole lot of folks. I think the idea of giving more information to individuals should be one that hopefully everybody rallies around. The idea of saying to somebody who's going to make a hugely important decision in her life that you should be able to see an ultrasound if you choose. You don't have to be there. You don't have to look at it. But hopefully they would be able to see that ultrasound. I hope that individuals might look at that and make a different choice than choosing to abort the baby. But there's no requirement that they will, but it certainly is an indicator of why we want to choose life in every way we can.
So you really expect everybody to rally around this?
Well, that's my optimistic hope. I'm an optimist.
There's no way.
I'm an optimist. Why would you not? Why would people not be in favor of more information?
Would the cost for that fall on every woman who potentially went in to get an abortion?
I don't know. I want to be honest and say I don't know exactly how they would choose to allocate the costs. But in an awful lot of facilities that already perform abortions, they have an ultrasound machine there because they have to make sure that they are able to see the fetus, the baby, and perform the procedure. So I don't think it would be any extra cost because all they would do is show the expectant mom that there's a growing, living baby inside of her.
Wanted to ask you, the governor presumably, if he's reelected, is going to run for president. He hasn't announced that, but people presume that. How has that affected business in Madison?
No effect whatsoever. Because he has not talked about that with me. We have never had a conversation. I think that he is doing an unbelievably good job as governor. As somebody who went through the recall where he became, a national figure and he raised money from people all around the country, I think he is appropriately helping others who are in tough situations politically, just as people helped him in, the recall. So I think it's nothing more than him doing what any popular Republican or Democratic governor would do, which is to use that popularity to help advance the causes they believe in.
So you think the trip to Iowa was just sort of payback for support, and it wasn't?
That's what I
launching
believe.
pad?
That's
Yeah.
what I believe. I mean,
Okay.
I think whenever he travels around the country, that's part of what he's doing. I mean, if you look at his campaign finance report, he raised money from an awful lot of folks all around the country who knew the stakes of our recall election. So he is now going and helping other people who are going to have tough races in 2014 to raise money because he believes in what they're doing. I
We
think
like to
it's
sit
normal.
around and kick these things around in
I
the
bet you
newsroom.
do.
So do you think he'll run if he wins a re-election in 2014?
I
As
have-
everyone expects him. I mean, right now there's not.
Yeah, I have no idea. I
No
really
gut
don't.
level. I think he might. I think he might not.
Well, don't you think? I think a lot of it depends on what happens if Paul Ryan decides to run.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it would be better for either one of them if they both chose to run. And from what the governor said, and I totally believe him, they have not had those discussions between the two of them.
Would you like to see him run?
I think that the message that he offers is one that other states should follow. I think that if you look at trying to make hard choices and good decisions, Scott Walker has been an awesome example. He is somebody who is stuck by what he believes, and we now see a year later, after the recall, almost a year, or a little bit over a year now.
Was that?
So who would you
last
push?
week,
Who would
yeah.
you push harder, Ryan or Walker?
From my perspective,
I'm going to
whoever
take.
could
I'm
win.
going to take. I'm going to take the David, and we'll just say let's do that over. Yeah, I mean, I think they are both excellent leaders, and they are examples of what we should have. Wisconsin's blessed. We have Reince Priebus as the chair of the national party, showing what it takes to rebuild the party. We have Paul Ryan at the national level, showing that we can take on debt and deficits and do it in a way that shows we have real ideas to offer. And we have Scott Walker, who's doing the same at the state level. They're three great guys.
On the recall, there was an effort, and I think it was your idea, Mr. Speaker, to redefine how a recall could come about. In other words, you had to say what you wanted to recall the politician about. What happened to that effort? Do you still plan to pursue that?
Yeah, that effort, actually, Representative Steinecke and Senator Harsdorf have introduced that bill, that constitutional amendment. That'll be part of what we hopefully discuss this fall. I still believe that you have to have more than disagreeing with somebody over a vote to recall an individual. I go back to that basic idea that if they have been convicted of or charged with a felony or misdemeanor, or if they've committed an ethical violation, that's the basic standard, that somebody has to have done something wrong. Not just had a belief that they might have run on or might not have discussed and recall them for that individual.
Now, the standard right now for locals is you have to provide a reason, any reason.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not sufficient?
Right, because the reason, if you look at recalls that are out there,
Yeah.
they were not based on, it could be something like he or she wasn't listening.
Okay.
Well, that's pretty subjective,
I
and
also
I think that that's not what it should be.
There's a
about.
bill out there reforming that process too. if I'm
Al,
informed.
and that was
There
part of
is.
this. That was
There
part of the
is.
package that Jeff put in,
Right.
But now
in the
it's
election
out.
reform package. But now it's a standalone bill.
Under your philosophy, would the county pension scandal recalls have been allowed?
As you move forward, if you remember, it never got to the point of whether or not people committed malfeasance in office by
Somebody did
not.
go to jail, though.
They did. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. So in my mind, those would be allowable underneath the statutes because the natural progression would have happened where I believe people would have either gone to jail as elected officials or they would have had ethics charges brought up just simply from not doing the homework before they made such a huge vote that impacted tax.
If they go to jail, they lose their seat anyway, don't they?
Well, it depends on if it's a felony, because my understanding is if you're convicted of a misdemeanor, you're not immediately removed from office. It's only a felony. Or ethics charge.
Just to be clear on
Yeah.
his, it wasn't, Tom Ament didn't go to jail. He was
No,
the
I
elected
understand.
official. So under the legislation, would you be able to recall him or not? We know all the situation now.
Right. Well, we'll never know because he left office before any sort of ethics charges or anything were brought up. So it's supposition, but my belief is that if our constitutional amendment was in place, that he would have been removed from office or had the potential for a recall under those scenarios because people would have brought up ethics charges. He clearly was given advice that he either didn't bother to research or didn't do it because it was in his own political or financial benefit. So I think you could have made an ethics charge to say that you at least need to understand the ramifications before you vote for one of those proposals.
Any other questions?
I got one more.
Go ahead.
this might land in your lap eventually, a new arena being discussed for the city, proposed as economic development. Where do you stand on that? Is there a possibility of any state support, any approval of new taxes for that? And the Miller Park tax, could that be used at some point to help build a new arena?
Well, I do not support extending the Miller Park tax for a new arena, period. I think that before the state of Wisconsin injects itself into something that we don't even know if there's community support for, we certainly have to see a plan that comes forward from either Milwaukee County, a regional effort, or the city of Milwaukee to say we are willing to come up with a plan and then come and present it to us for input.
Should it have a referendum?
I would hope that we would at least have a referendum if we went that way. I certainly think that the Brown County experience was much better. As you
So I would have brought up as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
They had a referendum.
It was close.
And it was very close. I mean, this is the Packers. I mean, this isn't the Bucks. I mean, we have statewide support and love for the Packers, and I think it was 52-48 or something along those lines. So I think it's up to the local folks. I think it's to make their case. I think it's up to the Bucks organization and others that might utilize a new arena to make their case to the state.
Should it be a one-county referendum, 5-county, statewide?
Well, that's why I think it's more important for regional leaders to sit down and talk about what they are willing to put on the table. I certainly don't support a new sales tax. I certainly don't support an idea that citizens are going to be asked to help front the cost for another major league franchise. But at the same time, I am open to finding more creative ways to help keep the Bucks here, but I don't think it's inherent upon taxpayers to have to always be the one to foot the bill. I mean, if you look at where the world is today, somehow we have had this big, huge argument about trying to give people a couple $100s of income tax relief, which I think goes a long way to help families and also to do it in a way to grow our economy. Well, by having us provide a huge subsidy to any professional team, it means they get to pay their players even more in the millions of dollars. So I don't really necessarily buy into the philosophy that I guess our whole country has, that we need to have higher taxes to support major arenas so that they can pay the players even more beyond their $1 million
But is there a
salaries.
public good there in terms of drawing people to that place and having them spend more money in the area and that sort of thing?
There could be, and that's why if we did anything, it'd have to be a referendum where they could make their case. Everybody would get to have their say. You know, I'm going to 3 or 4 Brewer games this year. My family has season tickets for the Packers. So, you know, I love the ability to go and see those facilities and to see the teams play, and they are a source of pride for Wisconsin. But to somehow make the future of all, you know, professional athletics be a responsibility of the taxpayers is just a step too far for me.
I think the Packers did a good job of. I think the
Yeah, or the
Packers
Bucks,
did a
I'm
good
sorry, yeah.
good job of making this more than just about them. I mean, it's a year-round facility that people are coming to and visiting. I mean, the restaurants are open, the Hall of Fame, it's utilized for meetings and conventions. So I mean, I think they did a good job of really turning into truly an economic development opportunity for that area.
And the idea behind a new arena would be sort of the same thing. You'd have restaurants there open year-round and a facility that could be used year-round.
Well, and if they were able to put together a regional partnership and they could convince taxpayers, either through a referendum if it was a new tax, or through some sort of economic development model that's more innovative than just asking taxpayers to foot the bill, I would certainly be open to looking at that. But it's too far ahead. I mean, we haven't even seen if Milwaukee can reach an agreement amongst themselves before they've even reached out to Waukesha or Racine or any other.
Would there be much support from Racine for?
No.
No. I didn't even finish the question.
I think that
They don't like Miller tax. So.
Yeah, that's right. Don't forget, Racine County is still one of the only counties in Wisconsin that does not have a local option sales tax. So I think that the idea of putting on another tax on top of Miller Park is just a non-starter in Racine County.
And George Petak is from.
Yes.
Yes,
he was. That's right.
Yes, he was. That's right.
Do you think it would help if the Bucks actually won more games?
Well, it
As a
certainly would
sports
be
fan,
better.
I would
yeah.
say yes.
Yeah. Right.
Well, I mean, Robin's right. I mean, millionaires that I don't know. There's a lot of connection not only with the community of Milwaukee but statewide. I mean, so there's just not a lot of that love for the team like there is for the Packers. And look how difficult that one was. So I think they got a tough road ahead
Where's
of
the
them.
Bucks Hall of Fame?
It's in the basement.
I think it used to be at the Mecca. They actually did have stuff out there.
I think they did, yeah.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thanks.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.